What are the lessons that China is getting from the Iran war? From the control of the Strait of Hormuz to the shutdown of Iran's eyes and ears even before airstrikes first began, in what's so far been a short but highly devastating conflict showing American and Israeli military power. Several days ago, this video was released by Tehran's state media. It reveals something we usually don't see: tunnels and tunnels of secret stockpiles, drones and missiles safely hidden in one of Iran's underground missile cities. But how safe did these infamous missile cities prove, with the Trump administration saying around 90% of Iran's missile capability, launchers, missiles and even drones are now destroyed or under the rubble in those hidden cities? Here's how the US and Israel did it.
As soon as they sent a missile up from a launcher, we were able to knock out that launcher within a period of 5 minutes or less, accurately right on the noggin. And our B-2 bombers recently dropped dozens of 2,000-pound bombs to destroy missile launchers all over Iran and buried deep under Iranian soil.
You can't, it's like lots of bullets without a gun. If you got 5,000 rounds of 9mm, but you only have 2 pistols, once you get rid of the 2 pistols, you don't have anything. And so those launchers are what we've been targeting with great success. And if they want to continue shooting, they have to continue exposing them, which means we continue to target them.
In fact, Trump says the war is all but over. Watch.
We're achieving major strides toward completing our military objective. And some people could say they're pretty well complete. We've wiped every single force in Iran out very completely. Most of Iran's naval power has been sunk. It's on the bottom of the sea. Their drones are way down. Their drone manufacturing's been hit starting today. Their missile capability is down to about 10%, maybe less. We're also hitting where they make missiles and where they deliver missiles. We've struck over 5,000 targets to date, some of them very major targets.
And with media reporting that the US action in the Middle East has endangered critical defense supplies to Asia, one of our guests today says that's based on a strategic misunderstanding. Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Khvat. To discuss this and more, I'm joined by Tony Hu, former US Department of Defense Senior Director for China, Taiwan and Mongolia, and from Canberra, Malcolm Davis, Australian Strategic Policy Institute Senior Analyst. Tony, welcome back to the studio.
Thank you.
And online from Canberra, Malcolm, a very warm welcome back.
Thank you.
This is 16 mine layers and other vessels near the Strait of Hormuz being destroyed by the US on March 10th. Donald Trump has warned Iran it will be hit harder if it lays mines in the strait, while Iran's Revolutionary Guard has repeated its threats to strike ships through the Strait of Hormuz unless the US and Israel cease their attacks. Reuters is reporting the US Navy has told the shipping industry that escorts are too risky for the time being. Meanwhile, data analyst Kepler reports Iran is shipping more oil through the strait now than it did last month, mostly headed for China. So Malcolm, if I could bring you in first. You've described in the Australian Financial Review how this conflict is a learning lab for China. Now, we know that military strategists continually wargame a scenario in which China blockades the Taiwan Strait. So what is China learning from Hormuz?
Well, firstly, they're learning how US military operations work. They're studying what weapons the US are using, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, how they employ joint and multi-domain operational effects across the air domain, the sea domain, and including the space and the cyber domain. The land operations, as of this time, are not so important, but I think they will become important in coming weeks. So they are learning a great deal from this in terms of how the US fights, how they project power, how they sustain air and missile campaigns, and the weaknesses such as their lack of magazine depth in terms of interceptor missiles for missile defense, their inability to counter the drone threat. I think the Chinese are learning a great deal.
Tony, when we look at this choke point almost as a strategic weapon, what is China learning in terms of how it can use choke points around Taiwan, or that they can be used against China?
Well, there are some things that they can apply, some things they can, like mine laying. Mine laying in Strait of Hormuz, where the water flow isn't that strong, it's easier done than in Taiwan Strait because of the speed of which the current flows and the danger of a loose mine that get flow into places like Hong Kong or Shanghai. So they have to consider that before they conduct any type of mine laying other than within the port itself or near the port itself. So, but I think Malcolm's right. China is trying to study how can they counter the multi-domain warfare that the United States have been so successfully used against the first strike, the Midnight Hammer, last year in June, and also against Venezuela, and now used it against in Iran, where the enemy was denied the ability to detect. Even if they detect, they don't have the ability to assess what's going on, and also the ability to decide what to do and also counter. So I think China is studying, trying to find a way to reduce or deny the United States the ability to execute multi-domain warfare.
Malcolm, bringing you back in terms of what the US has done, trying to enable energy transits, especially oil, global trade, do you think this sends the message to China that the US will not tolerate any disruptions to that and that it is prepared to strike?
Well, certainly, ensuring the safe and secure and stable supply of oil to markets around the world is absolutely crucial, not just for the United States. The United States doesn't get a lot of oil from the Persian Gulf. I think it's about 2% of its supply. So with countries such as my own Australia relying heavily on Middle Eastern oil, Japan, South Korea, and China as well, all relying on Middle Eastern oil, there's a recognition that if that oil is cut off, then global stock markets become chaotic. The US recognizes that they can't just ignore that aspect. They have to try and keep that oil flowing, because ultimately, if they don't, it comes back to hurt the US at the end of the day in terms of unstable stock markets and collapsing growth.
And what do you think China thinks how it can use that to its advantage? If it was to try to move on Taiwan, and we know all of the activity that it's doing also in the South China Sea.
Well, it's very interesting. The US seems to be backing away vis-a-vis Iran in terms of regime change. They're no longer talking so much about trying to get rid of the Iranian regime. So in a Taiwan scenario, if China is moving on Taiwan, not only would they be seeking to attack supply chains and supply lines and sea lanes of communication across the Indo-Pacific region, they may coordinate with the current regime in Iran to try and expand and widen the conflict beyond the Indo-Pacific region into the Middle East.
Okay. Let's go now to those missile cities we showed at the top of the show. Iran's missiles are key to its retaliation against Israel and the US, and therefore key to its survival. But the US and Israel say they have all but destroyed this capability by targeting the launchers themselves. And such weapons, such as the massive ordnance penetrator or bunker buster bombs that penetrate and explode deep underground, have degraded those missile cities. China, like Iran, also relies on deep underground tunnels to hide and protect its missile arsenal. Now built across multiple provinces, China has an estimated 5,000 kilometers of these network tunnels, making up a key component of the PLA rocket force's underground infrastructure. So would you say that China is also vulnerable? I mean, we may have to make a distinction between Iran's missile cities, which are multiple but separated. That's my understanding. China's appear to be networked. But still, when China sees this, in terms of the US and the Israel striking these launchers, does it feel vulnerable?
They should, because these weapons are specially developed to penetrate and hit these underground facilities. And Secretary of Defense Khvat said it very well. It's the launchers that matters, okay? And we know right now, for example, China has about 600 launchers for their medium and short-range missiles, even though they have probably close to 2,000 missiles. So if you can knock out these launchers, just like he said, that 2 pistols, you take that pistol away, you got 9,000 bullets, it means nothing. So, and that's actually is and should be Taiwan's strategy and United States strategy, that if China decides to use those weapons against Taiwan, then you knock those launchers out. Launchers have to come out. They can't fire from underground.
Right.
So they have to come out and show themselves. Once they come out and try to launch, then they become vulnerable. And China should understand that point.
Right.
And that kill chain, on the other hand, requires a sensor of some type, most likely satellite or UAV, to see it and be able to tell the attacking weapon, the shooter. So you link the sensor and shooter together to knock out those launchers.
Right. And in terms of the command and control, which I understand, those rocket forces, they're waiting for instructions from command and control. We know that through the multi-domain warfare, the US and Israel knocked out the command and control for Iran. Again, if this was to happen for China, how serious an issue does it pose?
It basically caused a total collapse of the defense capability. That's why when we attacked Iran the first time during Midnight Hammer, we met with no resistance. That's not by chance. Because before the conflict, most likely we have studied the enemy and using cyber, space, and of course airline, sea, and underwater capabilities to basically, we determine, based on certain order of battle that we study, we determine their weak points, and we strike those weak points to disrupt their ability to if their airplanes above, they got missiles, but they can't shoot it because they don't know where the airplane's actually at. So this is the multi-domain ability. It's not necessarily a hardware fight, but it disrupts the enemy to the point that they can't fight.
Okay, Malcolm, do you think Iran must change China's plan? We all know that China's plan basically is to overwhelm Taiwan with missile attacks at the beginning of any possible war. Do you think that there needs to be a shift now for the PLA in favor of less frequent strikes and more movement of those forces, given they now know that the US can destroy those launchers? Or does it simply tell China it must adopt an all-or-nothing approach with the long-range strikes?
Well, look, I think your other guest was making some great points, but I think China is a very different operational environment to Iran. Firstly, it's much larger. A lot of the PLA forces are much more dispersed across China. As you say, many of them in hardened, deep underground bunkers. And so it's much more difficult for the vast bulk of US military forces to actually reach them. Certainly stealth platforms like the B-2 and in the future the B-21 Raider will be able to get in there and strike at those Chinese missile systems once they're detected. But that's only a small proportion of US striking power compared to the sort of thing we're seeing against Iran at the moment. Second point is that the PLA has much stronger integrated air defenses than Iran. If you look at Iran's Air Force, or what used to be Iran's Air Force, it's all been destroyed now. Most of it was aircraft from the 70s and the 80s. If you look at what China's PLA Air Force has now, they are already flying 6th generation air combat aircraft. They've got large numbers of 5th generation combat aircraft, advanced surface-to-air missile systems and radars. So it's going to be much tougher for the US to actually get inside to China and attack deep inside China. And I think there's some question as to whether they will do that or not, because that raises the third point, is that with the PLA rocket forces, the Chinese have co-located conventional and nuclear missiles together. So if we go after those missiles, the Chinese won't know whether we're trying to attack their nuclear systems or their conventional systems. That generates a greater risk of unwanted escalation past the nuclear threshold, and that may actually constrain US willingness to go deep inside China to attack those missiles. So the Chinese may feel that, actually they're quite safe, irrespective of the example of Iran. They certainly may invest in greater mobility and dispersed forces in some instances, but I think they realise that they're a tougher nut to crack than Iran was.
Okay, how about this point, Tony? So Xi Jinping's consolidation of power, military and political power in China, do you think that he's wondering whether that's wise, given, within the first minute, Ali Khamenei and his 40 of his senior officials were taken out? I mean, if the same thing were happen, and of course what we're talking about here is a scenario where China actually attacks the US in any war over Taiwan, bringing the US in to the war. Would anyone in the CCP want to stand up to the US, given that China today is a one-man show?
Right. I think this is something that she has had to weigh against the pro and con. He was worried that the most senior and most experienced general, Zhang Youxia, he was worried about Zhang Youxia's power overcoming his power. So he took him down, but the end result is he doesn't have a good military advisor now. So I'm sure he's worried, because in reality, not being a trained military strategist, he might not have all the tools he needs to respond to a military attack. And I suspect this is something that he has to worry about, because most of the senior general that could have helped him had been removed already. So this is something I think he's losing sleep over right now.
Okay. Now, it's been reported that the US is moving Patriot and THAAD batteries out of South Korea to the Middle East. Some observers are raising the alarm over a prolonged war with Iran, constraining Indo-Pacific resources, in particular ammunition and missiles. But the Trump administration has pushed back. Watch.
But what I think some folks have been confused by is that our will might be limited, or our capabilities might be limited, or our munitions might be limited. They're wrong. And the Iranians are wrong to miscalculate American will and American authorities and American capabilities and American munitions. We have just now begun to fight, just now begun to surge.
And Taiwan says the US has not approached it about transferring any weapons, nor has its impending drone package been delayed. So, Tony, let me ask you, you say that there's a lot of misunderstanding about, this issue of redirecting or taking resources away from this region.
Yeah, because United States war reserves are allocated by regions. Obviously, we have stockpile in the Middle East, in Europe, in the continental United States, and of course in Asia Pacific. And right now, I suspect some of the stocks in Europe, because of the Ukrainian war, and some of the stock in the Middle East have been drawn down, and they might need to be replenished. But we have to keep in mind the humongous stockpile we have within the United States corners, which supplies depends on where the war is. They are the backup ones. And the huge supply in Asia Pacific remain intact. Some of the stuff within corners probably being shipped over also, because after all, the original supply, like the war reserve material in Asia Pacific, it's under the control of the commander of Indo-Pacific Command. And his job is to win any conflict in this region. And the only country that can threaten the United States' national survival right now is China. So he's not going to risk China over a limited regional conflict by shifting any material from Pacific to Europe. And it's not necessary. Plus, the Joint Staff, who worry about the survival of the United States, will not allow that to happen. So a lot of people don't understand. They think they see some of the equipment being shipped over from Korea, for example. We did lose some launchers and the THAAD systems, so they're supplementing it. But the basic stock to enable United States forces to defend U.S. interests in Asia Pacific, I don't think it's touched. I can't imagine that being touched.
So what you're saying is, unless those resources are being moved to protect the U.S. homeland,
or in Europe or Middle East, then it reduces the U.S. ability to sustain a fight in Asia Pacific, and I can't see that from happening.
Okay, Malcolm. Iran attacked U.S. bases, as we know, in the Gulf states that wanted to keep out of the fighting, and by doing so, it brought them in as combatants. wanting to attack Iran basically and deepen cooperation with the US. So is there a lesson there, do you think, for China in this region about hitting US bases should there be a war over Taiwan?
Look, I think it's almost certain that China would not simply limit their attacks to Taiwan. If they recognise that the US is likely to intervene in support of Taiwan, then they will strike US forces across the Indo-Pacific region, including US bases in Japan, in South Korea, and in Australia, and in the Philippines. The first salvo that effectively strikes at US forward deployed forces causes as much damage and destruction as possible. And then the second phase effectively tries to limit the ability of the US and its allies to operate within a certain region. And that's anti-access area denial. So I think that we need to make the assumption that in any war over Taiwan, Chinese would wage a wider war to try and prevent the US and its allies from intervening decisively. And the second point is that China can't afford to lose in a Taiwan crisis. So therefore, they're more likely to wage a protracted war that could last many weeks or many months. And when you look at their defense industrial capacity development, they're setting up exactly for such a protracted war. They want to be able to fight and outlast the US and ultimately win.
So what, help us understand, Malcolm, what are the differences and the parallels between, because I think everybody accepts that Iran's strategy to hit those Gulf states was actually wrong.
Well, yes. I mean, it certainly has backfired against Iran at the tactical military level because it's potentially brought more combatants in against Iran. I mean, they've been launching missiles against Incirlik Air Base in Turkey, which would then bring in NATO if those missiles actually do strike home. Thankfully, they've been intercepted by missile defense systems. And you're starting to see that now with Trump talking about potentially drawing out of the conflict, even though the regime is still in power. Yes, the Iranian military has been weakened, but their nuclear infrastructure is still there, their fissile materials there. And that's a real worry because it does suggest that if the US does actually declare victory and withdraw from the conflict sooner rather than later, then we could be back here in 2 or 3 years' time doing the whole thing again. And that has parallels, I think, with China and Taiwan. As I said, China is not prepared to accept defeat, but neither can the US accept defeat. So that's where you do start to see the possibility of protracted major power war that could occur over many months. And of course, the longer it goes on, the greater the risk is of escalation past the nuclear threshold. And I think that would be a real concern for both sides.
So Tony, again, trying to draw the parallels or differences between Iran and China. So in that scenario that Malcolm's outlined, obviously China is hands down, the existential threat in the region, as Iran is seen by the region, by the Gulf nations now. So, in terms of, long term, does this then, would this be a Pyrrhic victory, is what I'm saying, about China, or does China get so powerful it doesn't care?
Well, first of all, Malcolm's absolutely right. If China wants to attack Taiwan, they don't have a choice but must attack US and ally forces in the region to most likely in a initial strike to reduce everybody's ability to help Taiwan. Now, so they actually, once again, their defense production is tremendous right now. And the United States is trying to catch up. We have been complacent for too long. And but one thing about numbers, it doesn't directly represent a comeback capability. The quality and the strategy and tactics all makes a difference. So that's where hopefully the United States will prevail. So this is a deterrence factor. I believe China also understands that.
Okay. So Malcolm, the point that Tony was making there in terms of China's manufacturing prowess and its ability to make all of these weapons. Now, the US's Lucas, that's low unit cost attack system, has been cleverly re-engineered from Iran's own Shahed suicide drone. I want to ask you, what are all the ways that this is significant?
Oh, look, I think that signifies a recognition that low-cost drones for attack are an important capacity. It's something the US really hasn't had or invested in, and now they've realised they need it. And so they've grabbed a Shahed and they've reverse engineered it, and now they have Lucas. Now, the key question in my mind is how many can they build and how quickly? Because the Iranians have demonstrated their ability to build Shaheds in large numbers, and you're seeing the video there, in large numbers at very low cost. It's mass and scale that matters, not the actual drone per se. And so it comes back to defense industrial capacity. If the US can't develop the defense industrial capacity to build larger numbers of Lucas drones or indeed any other drone capability or missile defense systems, then they are at a disadvantage because they run out of firepower sooner than the Chinese do.
So trying to end on a more positive note, Tony, in terms of the speed at which Lucas was produced, can you talk to that?
I think once again, you have these low-end drones. The United States is trying to make these low-end drones to do even more missions. It doesn't have to be one-way missions, some of it. And also, United States is using other methods to kill drones, not necessarily just hit it, but using radio frequency and other things to kill drones. So production of additional low-cost drones is one thing, but what do you make drones for? You hit a target. So United States is developing other ways to get to those targets, and drone being one of the ways, but United States is expanding its arsenal in terms of variety. So it'd be a mistake to just look at these low-end drones only.
Okay, we'll have to end it there. We've run out of time. Thank you so much, Tony Hu and Malcolm Davis from Canberra. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. See you next time.